The wagon wheels groaned to a halt on the muddy street of Copper Falls, a ramshackle mining town clinging to the edge of the Montana Territory like a tick on a dying dog. Rosie Harper felt her mother's bony hand grip her wrist with the same cold determination that had marked every interaction between them for 19 years. "Get out!" Margaret Harper hissed, her thin lips barely moving. "I've dragged you far enough." Rosie's heart hammered against her ribs. The September wind carried the sharp scent of pine and approaching winter, mixed with the acrid smoke from a dozen cook fires. Men in worn denims and dust-covered hats paused their conversations to stare at the wagon, their eyes settling on Rosie with that familiar mixture of curiosity and contempt she'd learned to recognize before she could read. "Mama, please," Rosie whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the wagon and the distant sound of pickaxes striking stone. "I can work harder, I'll eat less. I promise." The slap came so fast Rosie didn't see it, only felt the sting blooming across her cheek like a brand. Margaret's face twisted with something beyond anger, disgust, perhaps, or the accumulated bitterness of a woman who had spent 2 decades blaming her daughter for every misfortune that had befallen her. "You're a burden I should have drowned at birth," Margaret spat. "Every scrap of food wasted on you could have kept your brothers fed. Every dress I tried to make you looked like a tent. You think any man would want you? You think anyone in this world has use for a girl like you?" The words weren't new. Rosie had heard variations of them since she was old enough to understand language. But hearing them here, in front of strangers who nodded along as if her mother spoke gospel truth, somehow made them cut deeper. Margaret shoved a small cloth bundle into Rosie's arms, her only possessions in the world: a spare dress, a hair ribbon her grandmother had given her before dying, and a small wooden cross. "There's a church at the end of this street. Maybe the preacher's wife needs someone to scrub floors. Maybe not. Either way, you're not my problem anymore." Before Rosie could form another plea, Margaret cracked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, spraying mud across Rosie's already stained skirt. She stood frozen, watching the only family she'd ever known disappear around the bend, heading west toward the promise of California gold that Margaret had talked about obsessively for months. The street seemed to hold its breath for a moment before resuming its rhythm. A drunk stumbled out of a saloon and nearly collided with her, cursing colorfully before staggering away. 2 women in faded calico dresses whispered to each other while pretending to examine vegetables at a merchant stall, their eyes sliding toward Rosie with undisguised judgment. Rosie clutched her bundle to her chest and began walking toward the church, each step feeling like she was wading through quicksand. The building was small, weathered wood that might have been white once but had faded to the color of old bones. She pushed open the door to find a sparse interior, rough-hewn pews, a simple altar, and a man in his 50s sweeping the floor with methodical precision. Reverend Thomas looked up at her entrance, his weathered face creasing into polite interest that quickly shifted to something else when he took in her appearance. Rosie had learned to read that look, the way people's eyes traveled down her body, cataloging, judging, dismissing. "I'm looking for work," she said quickly before he could speak. "Any work. I can clean, I can cook, I can tend animals. I don't need much pay, just somewhere to stay and food." The Reverend set down his broom, his expression uncomfortable. "Miss, We're a small congregation, barely keeping ourselves fed through the winter. My wife is sickly, and we've already got 2 mouths we can barely feed." He paused, seeming to wrestle with his conscience. "There's a boarding house down the street. Mrs. Chen might need help with laundry." Mrs. Chen didn't need help. Neither did the blacksmith, the general store owner, the doctor, or the owner of the Lucky Strike Saloon, who laughed in her face before slamming the door. By nightfall, Rosie had tried every establishment in Copper Falls. She'd seen doors close, heard excuses ranging from financial hardship to not needing extra hands. But beneath every rejection was the same unspoken truth. No one wanted her. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Rosie found a spot between 2 buildings, trying to make herself small in a space that barely accommodated her frame. She'd gone without dinner before, many times, but the cold was different here than in Kansas. This cold had teeth. She thought about her mother's wagon rolling westward and wondered if Margaret had felt even a moment of regret. Probably not. Margaret had made her feelings clear from Rosie's earliest memories. She was a mistake, a burden, living proof that God punished the undeserving with unlovable children. Rosie pressed her face against her knees and let the tears come silently. She'd learned long ago not to sob, not to make noise when crying. Noise attracted attention, and attention from her mother meant more cruelty, more reminders of how she'd ruined Margaret's life simply by existing. The wind picked up, carrying the first flakes of early snow. Rosie pulled her thin shawl tighter and tried to remember a time when she'd felt warm, truly warm. Nothing came to mind. She must have dozed despite the cold because she woke to shouting, men's voices, angry and slurred with drink. Rosie pressed herself harder against the wall, trying to disappear into the shadows. Saw her earlier, big as a house. Mother dumped her like garbage. Won't last a week out here. Their laughter echoed off the buildings before fading into the night. Rosie waited until silence returned before allowing herself to breathe normally again. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the ground in a thin white blanket that would have been beautiful if it didn't herald her likely death. She'd heard stories of people freezing to death in the mountains, found weeks or months later, preserved like wax figures. Would anyone even look for her? Would Margaret tell her brothers what had happened, or would she simply erase Rosie from the family history as if she'd never existed? The night stretched on endlessly. Rosie's teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasting blood. Her fingers went numb first, then her toes. She tried wiggling them, tried staying conscious, but the cold was seductive in its way, promising rest, promising an end to the endless rejection and pain. She was barely aware of the heavy footsteps approaching. When a shadow fell across her, she didn't have the energy to look up. "Jesus Christ," a deep voice muttered. "How long have you been out here?" Rosie managed to lift her head. Through the falling snow, she made out a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in furs that made him look like a bear standing upright. His face was hidden behind a thick beard, but his eyes reflected the lamplight from a nearby window, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "I asked you a question, girl." Since afternoon," Rosie managed through chattering teeth. "I'm sorry, I'll move." She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The man, because she could see now he was a man, not a bear, though the distinction seemed minimal, made an exasperated sound. "You'll die if you stay out here." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. "Can you walk?" I think so." "You think wrong." Before Rosie could protest, he bent down and scooped her up with surprising ease, as if she weighed nothing at all. No one had carried her since she was a small child. Even then, Margaret had complained about the weight, about how Rosie was too heavy for her age. But this man didn't grunt or strain. He simply turned and began walking toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to forest. Rosie knew she should be afraid. Strange man, middle of the night, isolated location. But she was too cold and too tired to care. If he planned to kill her, at least it would be warmer than freezing to death in an alley. The walk seemed to last hours, though it was probably less than one. They climbed steadily upward, leaving the lights of Copper Falls behind until the only illumination came from the moon reflecting off the snow. Finally, a cabin materialized from the darkness. Sturdy logs, chinked with moss, a stone chimney releasing a thin stream of smoke. The man shouldered open the door and deposited Rosie in a chair near a stone fireplace where flames crackled welcomingly. The sudden warmth hurt, pins and needles stabbing through her extremities as feeling returned. "Don't move," he commanded, then disappeared into what appeared to be a back room. Rosie looked around the cabin. It was sparse but clean, a table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserved foods and supplies, a bed in one corner covered with thick furs, rifle mounted over the door, everything arranged with military precision, nothing wasted, nothing decorative except her eyes caught on a small shelf near the bed, a wooden doll, its paint faded with age, a woman's bonnet, a child's shoe. The items seemed out of place in this austere space, like flowers growing in a graveyard. The man returned with blankets and what looked like a flannel nightshirt. He thrust them toward her. "Get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. There's a screen in the corner if you need privacy." Rosie took the items with numb fingers. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, his back to her, as he stirred something in a pot hanging over the fire. "Because no one else will." It was the most honest answer anyone had given her in years. Behind the wooden screen, Rosie peeled off her wet dress with difficulty, her fingers barely cooperating. The nightshirt was huge on her, clearly meant for the man, but it was dry and warm. She emerged to find him ladling something into a bowl. "Sit, eat." The stew was simple, venison, potatoes, wild onions, but it was the best thing Rosie had ever tasted, or maybe she was just that hungry. She ate slowly, waiting for him to snatch it away, to tell her she'd had enough, to remind her that food was wasted on someone like her. He did none of those things. He simply sat in the other chair, watching the fire, occasionally glancing at her as if making sure she was real. "Name's Elias Blackthorne," he said finally. "You?" Rosie Harper." "You got people in Copper Falls, Rosie Harper?" She shook her head. "Had. My mother brought me here and left." Something flickered across his face, understanding maybe, or recognition of a pain that matched his own. "That so?" "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old." He stood, stretching. "You can have the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." "No." The word came out sharper than Rosie intended. "I mean, I couldn't. This is your home. I can sleep on the floor or in the barn or—" "There's no barn. There's this cabin and about 50 miles of wilderness in every direction. You'll take the bed, and that's final. In the morning, we'll figure out what's to be done with you." That night, lying in a bed that smelled of pine and wood smoke, Rosie waited for sleep that wouldn't come. She listened to Elias's breathing, steady and deep from his makeshift pallet near the fire. Every instinct screamed that this was temporary, that kindness always had a price, that she should leave before he realized what a mistake he'd made. But where would she go? Back to Copper Falls to freeze? Into the wilderness to be eaten by wolves? At least here, she'd die warm. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to gray dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window. Elias was already up, moving quietly around the space with practiced efficiency. He noticed her stirring and nodded toward the table where he'd laid out bread and coffee. "You heal up quick?" Rosie sat up, confused. "Sir?" "Elias. And I asked if you heal quick. Got frostbite on a few fingers. Not bad, but they need watching." She looked down at her hands, seeing for the first time the darkened tips of 2 fingers on her right hand. She hadn't even felt them. I don't know. We'll find out." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "I'm heading into town for supplies in a few days. You want to go back? I'll take you. You want to stay here until you figure things out? That's fine too. But you'll earn your keep. I don't abide laziness." "I can work," Rosie said quickly. "I'm strong. I can chop wood, carry water, whatever you need." Something that might have been a smile tugged at his mouth, though it was hard to tell under all that beard. "We'll see." The days that followed established a rhythm. Elias left before dawn to check his trap lines, returning mid-morning with whatever he'd caught. Rosie cleaned, cooked, mended his clothes with the sewing kit she found in a trunk. She learned that he'd been living alone for years, that he spoke little but noticed everything, that he woke sometimes in the night, gasping from dreams he never discussed. She learned other things too, that he'd carved the doll on the shelf for a daughter who died 15 years ago, that his wife had gone with her, both taken by smallpox while he was away, that he'd been a cavalry scout once, before the guilt drove him into the mountains where he could hurt no one with his failures. He never asked her about her mother, never pressed for details about her past. It was both a relief and a source of anxiety. Rosie kept waiting for him to demand answers, to tell her she had to leave, to look at her with the disgust she'd learned to expect. Instead, he taught her to identify animal tracks in the snow, showed her how to set snares for rabbits, let her tend his small garden of root vegetables buried in the cold cellar, treated her like she had value. It was terrifying. One morning, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Rosie woke to find Elias standing by the window, staring out at fresh snow, with an expression of such profound sadness that she ached for him. "Today's the day they died," he said without turning around. "Sarah and Emma, 15 years ago today." Rosie didn't know what to say. Every condolence felt inadequate. Instead, she got up and started making breakfast, giving him space to grieve. Later, he found her in the cold cellar organizing potatoes. "You asked why I helped you that night." She looked up at him, illuminated by the lantern hanging from a beam. "You said because no one else would." "That's part of it." He leaned against the doorframe. "But truth is, I saw my Emma in you, not in how you look. She was small, dark-haired like her mama, but in your eyes. She had that same look the day the fever started, like she knew something terrible was coming and couldn't stop it." He paused. "I couldn't save her. Couldn't save either of them. But I could save you. Thought maybe that might balance the scales somehow." "I'm not your daughter," Rosie said quietly. "No, you're not." He met her eyes directly. "But you're not nothing either, Rosie Harper. Whatever that woman told you, whatever this world's been telling you, you're not nothing." The words broke something open inside her. Rosie felt tears streaming down her face before she could stop them, great heaving sobs that she'd suppressed for years. She expected Elias to leave, to be uncomfortable with her emotion, but instead he sat down on the dirt floor beside her and let her cry until she had nothing left. When the storm passed, he handed her his handkerchief, worn soft with age, and said, "Winter's setting in hard. Come spring, I'm taking you down to my brother's place in the valley. They've got a proper ranch, a family. You need to be around people, not just some hermit in the mountains." "I like the mountains," Rosie said. "I like it here." "Maybe, but you're 19. You've got a whole life ahead of you, and it shouldn't be spent hiding from the world because the world was cruel." "What if your brother doesn't want me?" Elias stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "Then he's a fool. But Jacob's not a fool. Neither is his wife Martha. They've got 3 kids, a thriving ranch, and more kindness in their little fingers than most people have in their whole bodies." He offered her his hand to help her up. "Besides, I already wrote to them. They're expecting us in April." The winter months passed in a strange mixture of peace and anxiety. Rosie learned that she liked the silence of the mountains, the way snow muffled everything into a hushed reverence. She learned that she was stronger than she'd thought, capable of tasks her mother had never allowed her to attempt, because you'll just make a mess of it. But she also learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days, she'd wake up feeling strong, capable, ready to face whatever came next. Other days, the sound of Elias's heavy footsteps would send her heart racing, certain he'd finally decided she was too much trouble. The sight of a woman in town, on the rare occasions they went for supplies, would make her freeze, scanning the face for her mother's features. Elias noticed, though he never pushed, he'd simply give her space when she needed it, or talk about inconsequential things until the panic passed. Once, when they encountered 2 women gossiping outside the general store, their eyes sliding over Rosie with unconcealed judgment, Elias had positioned himself between her and them with casual deliberation, as if blocking a cold wind. "Morning, ladies," he'd said, his voice carrying that particular edge that made people reconsider their words. The women had scattered like startled birds. But not all encounters were so easily managed. In late February, they'd gone to town for flour and coffee. Rosie had been examining bolts of fabric, wondering if she might make a new dress come spring, when she'd heard the whispers. "That's her, the one Blackthorn picked up? Probably feels sorry for her. No man would actually want. Heard she eats enough for 3 people. Charity case if I ever saw one." The words hit like physical blows. Rosie's hands trembled as she set down the fabric, her vision tunneling. She managed to walk outside before the tears came, standing in the muddy street while her whole body shook. Elias found her there 10 minutes later. He didn't ask what happened. He'd probably heard the whispers himself. He simply stood beside her until she could breathe again, then said, "Let's go home." That night, sitting by the fire, he'd broken his usual silence. People are cruel because they're afraid, afraid of anything different, anything that reminds them they're not as good as they pretend to be. Your mother was afraid. Those women are afraid. But their fear doesn't define your worth, Rosie. You understand me? I'm trying to, she'd whispered. That's all anyone can do. Just keep trying. April arrived with muddy roads and the first green shoots pushing through last year's dead grass. True to his word, Elias packed up the wagon, the same wagon Rosie had arrived in town on, which he'd bought from the livery, and they headed south toward the valley. The journey took 3 days. On the second night, camped beside a stream, Rosie finally asked the question that had been haunting her. What if they don't like me? Your family? Elias poked at the fire with a stick, sending up sparks. Then we'll come back to the mountains, but give them a chance, Rosie. Give yourself a chance. The Blackthorn Ranch appeared on the horizon just after noon on the third day, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a green valley, horses grazing in fenced paddocks, smoke rising from the main house's chimney. It looked like something from a dream, the kind of place Rosie had imagined when she was small and still believed in happy endings. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, shading her eyes against the sun. She was in her 40s, sturdy and handsome, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. When she recognized Elias, her face split into a genuine smile. Eli, finally decided to rejoin the living, did you? Elias climbed down from the wagon and was immediately engulfed in a hug that would have crushed a smaller man. Martha, where's my fool brother? Out with the horses, where else? She turned her attention to Rosie, still sitting frozen in the wagon. And this must be the young lady you wrote about. Rosie, isn't it? Rosie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Martha walked over and offered her hand. Well, come down from there. You must be exhausted from the journey. I've got stew warming and fresh bread and the guest room all ready for you. I don't want to impose. Impose? Martha laughed, a warm sound that reminded Rosie of summer rain. Dear girl, we've got more space than we know what to do with. Besides, Eli says you're handy with a needle and can cook. I could use another set of hands around here, especially with spring planting coming up. Over the next few days, Rosie met the rest of the Blackthorn clan. Jacob, Elias's younger brother, shared his siblings' height, but had an easier smile and lighter temperament. Their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from 8 to 15, accepted Rosie with the casual indifference of youth, neither welcoming nor hostile, just matter of fact. Martha, however, took Rosie under her wing with a determination that was both comforting and overwhelming. She showed Rosie the house, the barn, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden, introduced her to the ranch hands, a mix of cowboys and drifters who treated Rosie with polite respect, possibly because Jacob Blackthorn didn't tolerate disrespect toward women on his property. For the first time in her life, Rosie felt like she might belong somewhere. But old wounds don't heal overnight. A month into her stay, Martha had asked Rosie to ride into town with her for supplies. Rosie had frozen at the doorway to the general store, her heart pounding, unable to make her feet move forward. "What's wrong, honey?" Martha had asked gently. The people. What if they—" Martha had understood immediately. "They'll think what they want to think. But you're a Blackthorn now, under our protection. Anyone who has a problem with you has a problem with all of us. Now, hold your head up and walk in like you owned the place. It had worked mostly. The shopkeeper had been polite. The other customers had kept their whispers to themselves, and Rosie had made it through the transaction without falling apart. Small victories. Elias had stayed on at the ranch through spring and into summer, longer than anyone could remember him staying away from his mountain cabin. Rosie caught him watching her sometimes, not in a predatory way, but with a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite identify. One evening in late June, she found him sitting on the porch after dinner, staring out at the sunset. She sat down beside him without asking, a comfort level between them that had grown over the months. "You're worried about leaving me here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Some," he admitted. "Martha and Jacob are good people, but you feel responsible for me." He turned to look at her, the fading light casting shadows across his weathered face. "You were dying in that alley, Rosie. I've seen plenty of death in my life, been responsible for more than my share, but when I saw you there, something just... I couldn't walk away. Haven't been able to walk away since." "You saved my life," Rosie said quietly. "More than once. You don't owe me anything, Elias." "Maybe I owe myself something. Maybe saving you saved me too." He looked back at the sunset. "I've been dead inside for 15 years, Rosie, going through the motions, existing but not living. Then you came along, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning beyond checking trap lines. I remembered what it felt like to care about someone." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Rosie's heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I care about you too," she whispered, "but I'm not." She gestured helplessly at herself, unable to voice all the reasons why this couldn't be what it seemed to be. Elias reached over and took her hand, his palm rough with calluses, but warm. "You're what, Rosie? Not good enough? Not pretty enough? Not worthy?" His grip tightened slightly. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're brave and kind and stronger than anyone I've ever met. You survived 19 years of cruelty and came out the other side still able to smile, still able to care about others. That's not nothing." "People will talk," she said. "They'll say terrible things about you, about me, about..." "Let them talk. I've been called worse things by better people." He shifted to face her fully. "I'm not asking for an answer right now. Lord knows I'm twice your age and damaged goods myself. But I want you to know, you're not a charity case to me, Rosie. You're not a burden or a replacement for what I lost. You're just you, and that's enough. That's more than enough." Rosie felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they weren't tears of pain. "I don't know how to do this, to be happy, to believe I deserve it." "Neither do I," Elias said. "We'll figure it out together." The summer passed in a haze of golden days and warm nights. Rosie learned to ride properly, helped Martha with the garden, played with the children, and slowly, carefully, let herself believe that maybe this could last, that maybe she didn't have to wait for the other shoe to drop. Elias stayed. He helped Jacob with the horses, repaired fences, hunted elk for the winter stores, and every evening he and Rosie would find time to talk, sometimes about everything, sometimes about nothing, but always together. It was Martha who finally pushed things forward in late August. She'd cornered Rosie in the kitchen one morning while they were kneading bread. "That man loves you, you know." Rosie's hand stilled in the dough. He's been kind to me." "Kind?" Martha snorted. "Honey, Eli hasn't stayed out of those mountains for more than a week at a time in 15 years. Now he's been here 4 months, and every time you walk into a room, he lights up like Christmas morning. That's not kindness. That's love. But I'm not. Look at me, Martha, and he's—" Rosie gestured helplessly. Martha set down her dough and gripped Rosie's shoulders, making her meet her eyes. "You listen to me, Rosie Harper. I don't know what that witch of a mother told you, but she was wrong. You are beautiful. Yes, you are. Don't you dare shake your head at me. You have a good heart, strong hands, a quick mind, and more courage than most men I know. Any man would be lucky to have you, and Eli knows it." "What if people—" "To hell with people!" Martha's vehemence startled them both. She took a breath, lowering her voice. "Sorry, but I mean it. People will always find something to criticize. Too fat, too thin, too tall, too short, too old, too young. You can't live your life trying to please everyone else, Rosie. You'll just end up miserable and alone." That night, Rosie lay awake thinking about Martha's words, about Elias, who'd given her safety and respect and something she was afraid to name, about the fact that for the first time in her life, she could imagine a future that didn't terrify her. The next morning, she found Elias in the barn, tending to his horse. Her heart hammered as she approached, but she forced herself to speak. "I've been thinking about what you said, about us." He turned, his expression carefully neutral. "Yeah? I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of being hurt again, scared of disappointing you, scared that I'll wake up one day and you'll realize you made a mistake." Elias set down the brush he'd been using and walked toward her. "I'm scared too, Rosie. Scared of losing someone else I love. Scared I'm too old, too broken, too set in my ways. But I'm more scared of not trying, of letting fear rob me of something good." "You said love," Rosie whispered. "I did." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his rough hands. "I love you, Rosie Harper, not because I pity you or because you remind me of my daughter or because I think I can fix you. I love you because you're stubborn and brave and you laugh at my terrible jokes and you see me, really see me, and you haven't run away screaming yet." Rosie let out a watery laugh. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I just didn't think I was allowed to." "You're allowed," he said softly. "You're allowed to be happy, to be loved, to want things for yourself. You're allowed to be human, Rosie." When he kissed her, it was gentle, reverent, like she was something precious. Rosie had never been kissed before, never been touched with anything resembling tenderness. She wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, letting herself believe, really believe, that this was real. They were married in September, a small ceremony in the ranch's flower garden, with Martha crying happy tears and Jacob grinning like a fool and the children serving as witnesses. Rosie wore a dress Martha had sewn, pale blue like the mountain sky, and carried wild flowers Elias had picked that morning. She'd expected whispers, cruel comments, mockery. Instead, the small gathering of ranch hands and neighboring families offered genuine congratulations. If anyone disapproved, they kept it to themselves, possibly because Jacob had made it clear that any disrespect would result in an invitation to leave permanently. The real test came 2 weeks later. Rosie was in town with Martha buying thread when she heard a familiar voice behind her, cold, sharp, hateful. "Well, well, if it isn't my ungrateful daughter." Rosie's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly to find Margaret Harper standing in the doorway, looking older and meaner than Rosie remembered. Her mother's eyes raked over her, taking in the new dress, the wedding ring on her finger, the fact that Rosie no longer looked like a terrified girl. "Mother?" Rosie managed, her voice barely steady. "So you managed to trap someone after all," Margaret sneered. "I heard you married some mountain man. How much did you have to pay him to take you?" Before Rosie could respond, Martha stepped forward. "You must be the woman who abandoned her daughter to freeze to death in an alley. Charming to finally meet you." Margaret's face flushed. "That girl owed me. I fed her, clothed her for 19 years. She was a burden from birth." "She was a child," Martha said coldly. "Your child, and you threw her away like garbage." A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with avid interest. Rosie felt her old panic rising, the urge to apologize, to make herself smaller, to disappear. But then she remembered Elias's words. "You're allowed to be human." She straightened her shoulders and looked her mother in the eye. "You're right. I was a burden to you, but that says more about you than it does about me. A real mother loves her child regardless of how they look or what they weigh or whether they're convenient. You never loved me, and I finally understand that was your failing, not mine." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm not that scared little girl anymore," Rosie continued, her voice growing stronger. "I have people who love me now, real family, people who see my worth. And I don't need your approval or your forgiveness or anything from you ever again." "You ungrateful!" Margaret lunged forward, hand raised to strike. She never made contact. Elias had appeared from somewhere, catching Margaret's wrist mid-swing with casual strength. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, his voice carrying a threat that made Margaret go pale. "This is my daughter," Margaret sputtered. "I have every right. You gave up every right when you abandoned her." Elias released her wrist with a small push that sent her stumbling back. "She's my wife now, under my protection. You touch her again, you'll answer to me. And trust me, lady, you don't want that." Margaret looked around at the gathered crowd, seeing no sympathy, no support. Whatever she'd hoped to accomplish here had failed spectacularly. "You'll regret this," she hissed at Rosie. "You'll see, no one will ever really love someone like you." But the words had lost their power. Rosie looked at Elias standing beside her, at Martha's supportive presence, at the townspeople who were glaring at Margaret with undisguised disgust, and she knew the truth. "I'm already loved," she said simply, "and that's more than you'll ever understand." Margaret left town that afternoon, heading west in search of the gold that would forever elude her. Rosie never saw her again. That night, back at the ranch, Elias found Rosie sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars. He settled beside her with a grunt. "You were brave today," he said. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it brave." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "I'm proud of you, Rosie." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady strength of him, the warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with belonging. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for letting me." Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in snow. Rosie and Elias moved back to the mountain cabin, though they visited the ranch regularly. The isolation that had once seemed terrifying now felt peaceful, a sanctuary where two wounded souls could heal together. On Christmas morning, Rosie woke to find Elias had carved her a wooden box, smooth and perfect, with her name engraved on the lid. Inside was the hair ribbon her grandmother had given her, carefully cleaned and pressed, along with a new ribbon in deep green. "Thought you might want to keep some things," he said gruffly, "old and new together." Rosie threw her arms around him, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She'd never received a Christmas gift before, never had someone think of her happiness, her comfort, her heart. "I love you," she managed finally. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good," Elias said, holding her tight. "Means it matters. Means we're alive." Spring brought new beginnings. Rosie discovered she was pregnant, news that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Elias was quiet for a long moment when she told him, then pulled her close and wept, the first time she'd ever seen him cry. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing you, losing them, scared I'll fail again." "You won't," Rosie said with a certainty she hadn't known she possessed. "We won't. We're not the same people we were, Elias. We've both been broken and learned how to heal. We can do this. Together, always together." Their daughter was born in January during a snowstorm, with Martha and the local midwife in attendance. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at the cold, red-faced and perfect. Elias held her with shaking hands, tears streaming into his beard. "Emma," he whispered. "We'll call her Emma, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect," Rosie said, watching her husband cradle their child with infinite tenderness. They would have more children, 2 boys in the years that followed. The cabin would ring with laughter and arguments and the chaotic noise of family life. Rosie would learn that she was a good mother, patient and loving, everything Margaret had never been. Elias would learn that second chances were real, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. But that night, holding their newborn daughter while snow fell outside, they simply marveled at the impossibility of it all. That 2 people so broken could find each other. That a girl thrown away like garbage could become someone's whole world. That a man who'd stopped believing in hope could learn to hope again. "Thank you," Rosie whispered to Elias as dawn broke over the mountains. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when no one else would, for loving me when I couldn't love myself." Elias kissed her forehead, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby between them. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for showing me I could live again instead of just existing." Outside, the snow stopped falling. The sun rose over the mountain peaks, painting everything gold and pink and impossibly beautiful. Inside the cabin, 3 hearts beat together, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, by the stubborn refusal to let the world's cruelty have the final word. Rosie Harper Blackthorne was no longer the girl her mother had thrown away. She was a wife, a mother, a survivor, a fighter. She was beloved and cherished and valued beyond measure. She was, finally and completely, home. And in the end, that made all the difference.